So hello and welcome to the latest in the series of discussions that we are having on the part of Labour for Irish Unity, talking about issues around the unification of Ireland and the future shape of life on the island. So today I'm here with Danny Morrison, who probably needs no introduction, but he is a veteran Republican and an author. So you're very welcome, Danny.
Thank you, Paul, for this opportunity to speak to your listeners.
Okay, so it's 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, and we've seen a lot of celebrations around that in recent times. So where do you think we're at now, 25 years on from that?
Well, first of all, we've made great advances and there have been great changes. For example, the state that I currently live in is not the state that I grew up in. It's been completely transformed. Now, it hasn't been transformed enough as far as I'm concerned as an Irish Republican, because, you know, from my point of view, the conflict here and the divisions here are the responsibility of the British government, which fostered them in historic terms, but also in contemporary terms, and especially when you consider at the time of partition, when my community was condemned to second-class citizenship. At that time, Labour Party policy was against partition and for Irish unity. And now we see today almost no discernible difference in the leadership given by Keir Starmer, where in actual fact, Keir Starmer is a unionist in the opinion of many within the nationalist community in the north. So 25 years later, we consider massive progress has been made. We have seen the outworking of the Republican strategy of basically when a military stalemate was reached in the early 1990s, the Republican leadership took a very courageous decision, even though the IRA could have fought on for many, many more decades, to basically cash in the chips of the armed struggle and convert it into political capital. And that has been a very successful strategy to the extent where Sinn Féin overtook the main unionist party, the DUP, in last May's assembly elections, and also, in all likelihood, Sinn Féin is going to emerge as the largest party across councils in the north after the local government elections on the 18th of May. And according to all opinion polls, Sinn Féin is likely to lead the next government in Dublin. So we are in a very, very good position, a very strong position to argue the Republican case. And there are many battles to be fought, you know, both internally and within the north, to convince people of the merits of a united Ireland. That also has to be fought in the south, because the main establishment parties there and the establishment media there, you know, who called upon Republicans to lay down their arms and everything would be open to them and they'd be allowed to agitate, you know, a campaign for united Ireland. And it turns out that those are the ones who are resisting, for example, a referendum. Micheál Martin recently, up until recently, the Taoiseach said there will be no border referendum under my watch, which is remarkable when you consider the history of Fianna Fáil and, you know, the civil war that was fought. But another important issue is English, mostly English, public opinion. And I think that this is what we need to concentrate on. And I don't care if people in England adopt the view, a selfish view, this is costing us money. Why are we there? It doesn't matter for what reason, but we want to motivate people in England to put pressure on a government to grant a referendum to the people of the north on this issue of whether or not they want to remain in the union or whether or not they want a new Ireland. And we believe that in the course of a protracted campaign to bring to persuade people on this subject, that we can win that or come close to it.
Mm-hmm. So when do you think there should be a border poll, if there is one?
Well, certainly the Sinn Féin position is there needs to be preparations for it, first of all. So the Irish government could be at this point in time bringing in I'm not an economist, and I know that a united Ireland, in order to be persuasive, has to make social, economic, and political sense. And we have to make that case. And I think that case can be made. I mean, the 6 counties for this last 60, 70 years is a dependency It's cap in hand to Britain. I don't even know how the unions could be so proud of that position. That it's a begging bowl. And I remember Harold Wilson, Prime Minister in 1874, referring to this attitude as being spongers. You know, you sponge it off the British and you give nothing in return and no loyalty. And of course, you can see a rerun of that psychologically with the DUP supporting the most extreme Brexiteers, and it has backfired on them big time, because now we've got the Windsor Protocol, or the Windsor Framework, which is a way of implementing the protocol, keeping the North within the European Union and then within the single market. And again, we have the support of the European Union. If there's United Ireland, they've said that they will allow the North to completely rejoin the European Union without any strings attached.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So do you think that with the right preparation and with proper planning, which of course the Brexit campaign, the Remain campaign didn't make the right case, unfortunately, but do you think that if the time was given and a fair debate and so on was had, that the border poll could actually be won in the near future?
I'm not so sure about the near future, and of course we have to describe what the near future is. But what I know is that we are approaching a tipping point, and a lot of unions. And I have as a result of the ceasefire, as a result of reconciliation programs. You know, I meet lots of unionists, former loyalist paramilitaries, former IUC men, former British soldiers, and still active unionist politicians. And I know that many within the unionist community who would have resisted any change during the course of the IRA campaign can now view change in a different climate, where it's not as a result of coercion. It's that they're looking at it in the cold light of the day. They're looking at how progressively the South has come along in terms of social issues, in terms of women's health issues, in terms of LGBT rights, etc. And so the South of Ireland, it's not Rome rule, and they can look at it again factually and examine the money that could be generated, the attraction of tourism and new businesses, new enterprises in an all Ireland economic structure. And you can actually see that development. So, for example, as a result of the protocol, there has been a huge increase in north-south trade. I mean, I know this is just sort of like a small story, but I was going down on a train 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, and I would from listening to conversations, I would say a lot of the people who were on that train going down for the day were people from a unionist background, from a unionist community, and they were and on another occasion, this again is a small story. After my brother was released on the Good Friday Agreement, we went camping in the south of Ireland, and on a camping site, a van pulled up, a man got out, his wife and children were putting up a tent. And my brother turned around and says, he's a prison officer. He was in the H blocks. And we went over to him, and at first he was a bit, concerned. And I put out my hand, and he says, I love coming down here. I says, it's your country. He says, I says, you're more than welcome. We opened a couple of bottles of beer and drank a couple of bottles of beer. So you have this, there's very little hostility. Certainly in the border communities, people have been used to working across the border. People from the unionist community do business all of the time with their southern counterparts. So I think that resistance is broken down completely. And I think that you can persuade people to look upon it as a new, fresh beginning, because it's a travel of direction. The union, the union is not just broken, it's finished. And England has nothing to offer us. And we don't want to be a part of England. We don't want to be a part of the union. And again, raw experience. In my case, I lost many friends in the conflict. British soldiers killed many of my friends. They arrested me on 4 occasions, and I was interned and jailed in Crumlin Road and jailed in Long Cash, and sentenced to 8 years imprisonment. We can put all of that behind us, and we can start off afresh and be reconciled. And you can see that in the gestures, for example, of Michelle O'Neill and Alec Maskey, former prisoner, and the last speaker of the Stormont Assembly, who are prepared to go over there as a gesture towards the unionist community, because they look upon royalty differently than we do. And and go to the coronation, which I, from a Republican ideological point of view, have absolutely no time for monarchy. But you can see that things are changing, and there is no longer, just there's tiny bits of conflict here, some dissident activity, and currently there's a bit of a loyalist feud in North Down and in East Antrim, but that isn't impacting on the political situation and on political progress and political developments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's quite interesting now that you mentioned the coronation, because I think, and this is a very difficult conversation I think to have in just 15 minutes, but it's about the whole unionist identity and what you said about the relationship with England. I think unionism in its psyche has got a sense of Britishness that I don't think anyone in England necessarily has anymore, even the Brexiters, because I felt that was about English nationalism. And again, I'm not saying that, you know, nobody could have put forward another argument for Brexit that would have been completely different and would have been from another perspective other than imperial nostalgia or whatever. But I think unionists, to my mind, and I can't speak for them, but this is how I perceive it, they wouldn't be so worried about the loss of England as the center of their relationship. But I think they have a sense of Britishness that would have to be incorporated in some way into a united Ireland. So how would we reassure them about that?
Well, first of all, they have to tell us what they want. I mean, unless they do that. But the difficulty that, for example, if we want to step out of our own shoes and try to place ourselves in the position of someone like Jeffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP, or anybody in a similar position in a colonial situation across the world, they are afraid that if they take the first step, it's the slippery slope. Once they concede something, there's almost an inevitability about that. And I can understand that. And so they will hold out as long as possible. But it makes it very difficult for them to hold out if there is an opinion which becomes mainstream, not just among the Irish community in Britain, but becomes mainstream that it's over. We've no real connection with her. And even that opinion poll, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, followed by a really interesting feature in the Daily Telegraph, where a vast majority of English voters said they don't care if to get Brexit, they were prepared to ditch the north of Ireland. That's what they said. So they do not feel this emotional relationship that the unionists feel. And some unionists have actually said, and the irony of it is, we're more British than the British. Mm-hmm. And whenever Ulster Scots, the Presbyterians who were persecuted by the established church in the 16th century, when they first landed here, they were persecuted. A lot of them went to North America. They assimilated. They didn't call themselves British. They became American. And the unionists who are here, over a period of time, if a partition hadn't taken place, I believe that over a period of 2-3 decades, you would have seen assimilation taking place. This is our homeland. And you see it, lots of people you could look back at certain figures that came from the unionist community. They call themselves Irish. Van Morrison, I'm Irish. Even Ian Paisley turned around and said, I am Irish. I'm an Ulsterman, but I am Irish. So this fixation will eventually drop off. And I think that we can, provided we're all honest with each other and there's no attempt to betray people or to fool people, as long as our cards are all on the table. Now, I don't know what concessions are needed. People have said, if you come in, if the south of Ireland and the north were together to join the Commonwealth, that would be enough. Someone else says, the flag has to be changed. Get rid of the tricolour. Somebody else says, the national anthem has to be changed. Get rid of R in the vein. And at some stage you have to say to yourself, we have a say as well in the fabric of the new Ireland and what it represents. What I do know is this: is that in terms of what did the Republican movement give in order to bring about peace? This is what we give. Okay. The Unionists said that Articles 2 and 3 of the Irish Constitution were offensive in a territorial claim over their lives and was the raison d'etre of the IRA, which they weren't. But anyway, that's what they said. So Sinn Féin agreed to the amendments of Articles 2 and 3. We ended our policy of boycott and stormont, the symbol of our second-class citizenship, to go in and work with unions and build relationships. We recognised the PSNI. We recognised the judiciary. We recognize how they view the monarchy. We take part in Remembrance Day, laying a wreath for the dead of the First and the Second World War, again, something that's close to Unionists. And we struck deals with them in various areas. For example, in North Belfast, they marched past the nationalist area on their way to the field on the 12th of July, but they don't come marching back through that area by agreement, because when they come back, lots of them had drink on them, and it led to sectarian fights. So I don't know. They need to be specific about what they want, but they're not going to say that until they know the game is up. Now, some of them who are friends of mine have already said they've got their Irish passports, and they have two friends in particular have said to me, and they come from a security force background, have said to me, if a referendum, if the people vote for United Ireland, I'm in, Danny. I'm in. And I think that is breaking down all over the place. I mean, the hostility to the Irish language, for example, it has been shown by Linda Irvine in East Belfast, where Protestants are have lots of Protestants. I don't like to use that term, but unfortunately, it's shorthand for former unionists or members of the unionist community supporting the Irish language. Some of them are supporting a GAA club being set up in East Belfast. So there's lots of things happening, lots of small things on the ground, and the cumulative effect of all of this is to go towards that tipping point I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, again, I have heard younger unionists as well saying that ultimately it is about money in their pocket. And that's not to say that their identity is just all to do with the economy or whatever, but it's probably coming from the fact that we now live in an environment, north, south, east, west, where I think a lot of the things that we engage with on a daily basis have nothing to do with religion, for example, or even to do with political identities in that moment. The sports that we watch, the music that we listen to, the shows we watch on television, in common. And when people actually think about the stuff that matters to them on an everyday basis, I don't think it's issues of flags and symbols, but it is if people feel that those are under threat. And I think that's one of the things with the Good Friday Agreement, looking in as someone who's lived in London and therefore isn't experiencing this on a daily basis. But when I look in, there doesn't seem to have been that equality of identity that the Good Friday Agreement promised.
Well, they blocked, the unionists blocked an Irish Language Act, even though the promise of it was in the Good Friday Agreement, as was a Bill of Rights, which they blocked. It was also in St Andrews Agreement. So there is a reluctance there to, and of course, unions adopted a terrible stance on women's health issues and on the LGBT community, or hostility to migrants coming in, asylum seekers, etc. But I wouldn't overstate the degree of homogenization that's taken place in terms of what we watch or listen to. But I think on the ground, things are changing. For example, up until recently, I was the chairperson of Féile an Phobal, the West Belfast Festival. It's the largest community festival in Ireland, and we have a special night for young people, and we give out thousands of tickets, and we know that there's thousands of young people come from the Shankill and Sandy Row to dance the rave music with their nationalist counterparts. Not my scene, but it brings them together. And I know that friendships have been formed and relationships have been formed. So the young people don't have that baggage. And the more the past, recedes, because I don't think, by the way, I don't think that, and I did a debate recently on this with a unionist. Uh, the legacy is dragging us all down. The legacy issues, this unionist was demanding, truth, the IRA to admit what it said. I said, well, we actually know 95% what the IRA did. We actually don't know what the British government did. The way they are closing down inquiries with this repressive legislation that they're passing to basically amnesty their forces, and they use public immunity certificates. They're suppressing inquests, etc. And I don't know of any conflict anywhere in the world, anywhere throughout history, where all the victims got justice at the end of it. And history doesn't work like that, and conflict doesn't work like that. But the further into the past it goes, I think the easier it is for the young people of the divided communities across the north to come together and to share things. And I think that's where progress is being made. I know where my own grandchildren have their friends, and it's not just on the Falls Road.
Yeah. So then you would be, so just to close, probably on a final note, you would be quite positive about the next generation in Ireland having a life that perhaps, certainly when I was growing up, the conflict was still going on. It was just coming to an end in my university days. But I would hope that the next generation won't experience anything like that.
Well, I'm quite confident that they won't. But I also have to remember, the British governments. It was not for nothing that I think the French nickname Perfidious Albion, treacherous England, and it would not be a healthy situation if we got to the stage where demonstrably several authorities were telling us, their public opinion polls or election results were telling us that we had now reached a stage where in all likelihood a referendum would result in a majority for Irish unity. If at that stage the British government said, no, you're not getting one. Well, Scotland wanted a second independence referendum, and the British government says you're not getting it. In our case, it's built into the Good Friday Agreement, although the criteria for it hasn't been published by the British government. So that would be a dangerous situation if we had reached that point after going through all of these obstacle courses that they've set up for us, only for them to turn around and change the rules again. We can see it, by the way, with the DUP. Their whole point of argument about the framework, or the Windsor framework, is they're arguing that any change in the north needs a majority of both nationalists and unionists. And that's the attempt. That's this business of dual consent is an attempt to move the goalposts once again. And that is dangerous, because if 51% is enough to keep me in the union with Britain, then 51% also has to be enough to take me out of that union. Now, obviously, it would be much more politically healthy if we got a bigger number involved, but that principle can't be compromised on. And that's a dangerous situation again. And that's what the senior unionists in the DUP, this is what their strategy is, to try and get that on paper, to try and set that precedent, so that in 5 or 10 years' time they can turn around and say, well, hold on a minute, that's the way we ran the test for the framework, the Windsor framework. So now we have to run that test for a referendum. No, that can't happen. We know what the rules are, and the ground rules have to be accepted. And everybody, we bought into this, and it brought about peace. So they can't be changing the rules. So that would be just my one little concern, that the British government, whatever position it could be in 10 years' time, perhaps a minority government relying on the support of the unionists. It happened before with John Major, needed the Ulster unionists in 1984, 1995, and that led to the peace breaking down with the IRA bombing Canary Wharf, and it wasn't reinstated until 1997, and that led to the Good Friday Agreement a year later. So we have to have good faith on all sides, and that's just the one cautionary remark I would make.
Okay, well, I suppose one thing that we could say about that is the DUP's argument for a supermajority or whatever is completely contradicted by the fact that the thing that has brought us to this point in many ways is
That's right.
Brexit. Has certainly precipitated it.
Yeah, because the
And,
majority in the north voted to remain in the EU.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, I don't think they can change their colours in that way, or nail a different set of colours to the mast when they see things sailing in a different direction.
Right.
But I think that's been a very interesting discussion, and one with plenty of things to think about as well for the future, and you know, one that will give an interesting perspective for listeners here in Britain, where I am, and again, I think back across the water as well. So thanks very much, Danny.
Okay, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for all your support.